on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is
My mother found me 10 years after I disappeared. When I returned home to see my dying grandmother, I uncovered a family secret that changed everything. I had always believed that I could escape my past. I even moved to another continent to leave it behind, but it seems that I can no longer continue to run. It is catching up with me, and this time I have no way of ignoring it. In any other circumstances, I would never consider being in the same room as those people who have caused me so much suffering. But how can I refuse this invitation to a family reunion, knowing what I know now? I wish I had never opened that email that my mother sent me a week ago. I hardly ever check the spam folder, but on that particular day I was looking for a lost confirmation. I found myself scrolling through the junk messages when, suddenly, I was completely transfixed by a name that I thought I would never see again. My mother's. 10 years had passed since our last communication. I had erased all traces of my existence, even going so far as to change my name. I don't know how she managed to find me, but it shows a lot of nerve on her part to do so after what she and my father did to me. I would have opened the email to delete it immediately, but when the system asked me if I was sure, I stopped. I was curious about its contents. Part of me longed for an apology, an explanation of why my parents failed me so profoundly. Perhaps then I could heal, because the truth is that I still haven't. I buried everything about my past, but during the nights, when I close my eyes, I inevitably return to those painful moments. I canceled the deletion and started to read the message. I scanned it quickly, without much interest. It was basically a family update, and my mother expressing how much she missed me. There was a long paragraph where she mentioned how devastated she had been when I disappeared, but that at least now she could sleep peacefully knowing that I was alive and well. However, it was the last paragraph that stayed in my mind long after I closed the email. She was asking me to return home for a family gathering. It was a significant occasion because my grandmother was seriously ill, possibly in her final days. She wanted to gather the whole family together for a final dinner before being admitted to a hospice. This dinner would take place in just 5 days' time. Being on another continent, it would take me at least a full day to get there. If I decided to return, I would have to face the person I detest most in this world, and my mother was perfectly aware of that. There was a section of the letter that she had emphasized especially. She explained that she understood how complicated the relationship between my brother and I was, but she hoped that he could see my grandmother one last time. She promised that my brother would behave appropriately, that he was now a mature man, a father, a husband. All of this struck me as extremely ironic, considering my brother's track record. Now he's responsible for other people. He's the last person in the world who should be a father, let alone a husband. I didn't care if he had supposedly changed. People like him don't change, not with what they carry on their conscience. My mother was completely wrong. I had no obligation to attend that meeting, but thinking about my grandmother filled me with guilt, remembering the kindest woman I had ever known. Visiting her house represented the best of my childhood. It was my refuge away from a home that was a real torment for me. By her side, I felt loved and protected. I didn't keep in touch with her after running away from home at 18. I considered visiting her, but I didn't want to involve her in my personal chaos. Besides, I knew my parents would manipulate her to try to get me to come back. So instead, I left as soon as I had the chance, escaping the horrors that I'm still trying to overcome. I had some savings and a remarkable ability with computers. I left the city and got a job in a computer shop, living in a small apartment above the shop. It wasn't much, but it gave me freedom. One day, I attended to a customer who would transform my life. He offered me the opportunity to get a scholarship abroad that would start in 6 months. I was about to turn 19, with no clear direction in my life and no possessions in my name, so naturally I accepted. Over the next 6 months, I erased my digital footprint, which meant deleting all my social networks and accounts that mentioned me. I changed my name and took preparatory courses while working. Then I moved. I am now 28 years old and work in security at one of the main technology companies in my country. I speak the local language almost fluently and will be getting married next year. I have not kept in touch with my family during all this time and have made it extremely difficult for them to find me. That's why I'm so surprised that my mother managed to get my email address. In her message, she expressed how proud she was of my achievements. Maybe she found me through my work. It makes sense, because when I changed my surname, I used my mother's maiden name and a variation of my middle name. I was 19 at the time. It wasn't very clever, considering that anyone could have found out. My point is that reading that email revived memories of the time I shared with my grandmother. She was incredibly kind and affectionate to me, my true safe haven. I feel guilty for not having thought much about her over the years. Now she is on the verge of death. I can't believe that so many years have gone by without giving her a hug, without enjoying her tea, without listening to any of her stories. I am beginning to feel a deep sense of guilt, along with an intense desire to see her one last time. But I am also afraid, because it will be the first time I have seen my brother since I escaped. I am afraid that meeting will affect me, psychologically. Because of what happened, I have barely been able to process it. Now, I am left with only the occasional nightmare. Sometimes I use sleeping pills, but in moderation because I don't want to become dependent on them. I have been constantly thinking about this email. In fact, it is now 4 a.m. and I have to be at the gym in 2 hours. Then my working day starts soon after. I can't close my eyes because when I do, the pain and guilt for my grandmother invade me. I wonder if she is suffering at this moment, if she resents me for not having kept in touch. I don't know. I don't even have her phone number, and she doesn't use social networks. I don't know what to do. The only way to communicate with her is through my mother, who left me a number I can call. She still has the same number that I memorized when I was 7 years old. They continue with their lives, sleeping peacefully, while I deal with all these demons in my mind. It seems that things haven't changed much, has it, Mother? She is still manipulative and knows exactly how to get what she wants. She knows how much I love my grandmother and that I would never consider returning if it weren't for her. I feel completely lost, with no idea what to do. Do I ignore the email and get on with my life, even though the guilt is consuming me? Or do I attend the family reunion, knowing it will probably be a complete disaster because of the conflict with my brother? I am totally convinced that problems will arise because I am no longer that vulnerable young woman. I know he will try to provoke me, but this time I won't allow it. I won't let him make me feel inferior for even an instant longer. Nor can I bear to be in the same room as him, knowing that he continues to go unpunished for his actions. That my parents deliberately ignored his behavior and now expect me to simply share the table with him. It's disgusting. Update 1. 6 days have passed. I did it. I booked the flight and returned home. It has been an interesting experience, to say the least, especially when confronting the ghosts of my past. However, there have been truly positive moments that make it all worthwhile. For example, it was wonderful to meet my grandmother again after 10 years. Discovering that my mother wasn't lying about her illness was not so wonderful. Although I wouldn't have minded her lying, because she would have deceived me. My grandmother has aged considerably and now uses a wheelchair. Despite this, she was immensely happy to see me. Seeing her made me forget, even if only momentarily, how uncomfortable it was to be in the same room as the brother who ruined my life. Yes, that is something I can never forgive him for. I understand that some situations may seem like simple mischief or misunderstandings, but this is not the case. I have seen true evil, and it has my brother's face. On one occasion, he threw me into the pool knowing full well that I couldn't swim. Then, as I desperately fought for my life, he laughed. The only thing he hadn't done was bring in an electrical device connected to a long enough cable to threaten me. The reason? He hadn't completed all the tasks he was supposed to. I had to apologize and give him my allowance for a whole year to leave me alone. On top of that, he would hit me every time I said something he didn't like. He was 6 years older than me and was still living with our parents when all this happened. I told them about these incidents, but they didn't care. They were hardly ever at home and left him in charge. They told me to stop whining like a little girl and start getting along with him. My brother would leave me without food for days, simply because I looked at him inappropriately, according to him. I survived on nothing but water and didn't even dare to try a bite. Somehow, he always found out and beat me until I was breathless. Sometimes he threatened to destroy all my electronic devices and blame it on me. He did it once, and our parents replaced them, but they believed it had been me. He told them I had an angry outburst. I was punished for weeks and banned from summer camp because of him. Once, I was so exhausted that I didn't hear him knock on the door after I returned, and I ended up sleeping outside. When he came into the house, he seemed surprisingly calm. That night, I woke up to find myself surrounded by frogs jumping all over my bed. When I tried to open the door, it was blocked. He had tied it around the heater. I had to sleep curled up in the corner of my room. I couldn't use my bed for days and could only rest on the sofa during the day when he was at work. There are worse things he did to me that I can't mention here. What I have just related represents approximately the average level of everything he made me suffer. Basically, he drove me to depression, and I began to lose concentration at school. When I told my parents, they accused me of exaggerating. Even when my grades went down, instead of helping me, they labeled me a failure and told me to stop blaming my brother. And let's remember that this was a grown man with a job, intimidating a child like that. Seeing him again brought back all those memories. Imagine how I felt when, after talking to my grandmother, he invited me for a drink. I feel sick just thinking about our first conversation after so many years. I can't do it. I don't think I can talk about this. I was wrong to believe I was ready. Maybe I should book a flight back and forget this ever happened. Update 2. Sorry to interrupt the previous update. I felt overwhelmed when I thought back to my interaction with my brother. It was extremely unpleasant because he acted as if he had done nothing wrong. The way he would look at me and smile occasionally, it was the same smile he wore after getting away with hurting me. I wanted to ask him why he did it. The question was on the tip of my tongue, but I was unable to articulate it. He seemed to still wield considerable power over me and almost made me forget the real reason for my return. I went back to visit my grandmother. As well as other relatives, my brother was also present, accompanied by a woman who I later discovered was his wife. We shared a dinner at my grandmother's house, during which my brother consumed a fair amount of alcohol. The dinner was interesting because of his restless and uncontrolled behavior. His wife seemed so embarrassed that I felt empathy towards her. Other than that, the dinner passed without major incidents. I returned to my hotel room, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed on my way out. My brother was holding his wife's arm tightly and looking at her with absolute contempt. I wondered what their relationship would be like now that he had a wife. Had she become his new victim? I extended my stay in the city. I planned to stay for quite some time because I was finally taking legal action against my brother. I wanted the world to know about his actions and for him to answer for them, even if years had passed. I made this decision upon my return. I didn't care that he was now a husband and father. I needed to hold him accountable for his actions, especially since I knew that I was not the only person my brother had harmed. Some years ago, I did some research on him and discovered additional information that showed that his abusive behavior was not recent nor directed exclusively at me. He had been expelled from school for harassing a classmate and sending him to the hospital. I am convinced that there are more people he has hurt. I hired a private investigator to locate these people, but for now, my brother has already been officially notified. He was served with legal documents a few hours ago, and he has already sent me messages expressing his displeasure. He questions why I am reliving the past and stirring up issues that he says are long since behind us. He claims that he has already moved on and wishes that I would just heal too. My parents arrived at the hotel shortly after my conversation with my brother. Let's just say they are extremely upset about the drama I am supposedly creating. They demanded that I stop the whole process and drop the charges before the family found out. Before the family found out, they allowed all of this to happen right in front of them. I have scars, both physical and psychological, from what he did to me. I don't care what the family finds out. I suspect that many of them already knew the true nature of my brother. My parents explained to me that my brother was a problematic person until his 20s, but that he didn't deserve to go to prison. I asked them if they knew that I wasn't the only person he had hurt. They looked at each other, and that look revealed everything. 4 years, I have been monitoring my brother, and he has several more victims. Some have not spoken out of fear, and I know that he continued to harm others until about 2 years ago. My father ordered me to return to my country, claiming that I was only causing problems in their lives. He then reproached my mother for never having contacted me and warned her that bringing me back would only create more conflict. So I kicked them out of my room. Barely 10 minutes had passed when I received a message from an unknown number. I need to see that individual behind bars, and I won't rest until that day comes. And if possible, My parents should accompany him because they are just as responsible as he is. Update 3. Several months have passed, and I have been constantly traveling between two countries. I think I have permanent jet lag at this point. I'll deal with it when everything stabilizes, but for now, I'm driven by pure adrenaline. I did not drop the charges against my brother. I found someone else willing to provide more evidence against him, and that was enough to strengthen the case because of their proximity to my brother. I'll tell you more about it later. Meanwhile, I have also located one of his most significant victims throughout his history as a systematic abuser. For years, I have been looking for the young man my brother sent to the hospital, but I didn't even know his name. However, I have finally been able to find him. We are already preparing the legal groundwork. This young man has hearing problems due to my brother's aggression. It turns out that my brother used to harass him to extract money from him and force him to do his academic work, until one day the situation got completely out of hand. He beat him so violently that another student found him unconscious, and they had to rush him to hospital. My brother was expelled, but as he was a minor, he did not receive a prison sentence. With his testimony and mine, we managed to convince the court that my brother had tried to end his life and that he had caused me severe psychological damage. I even asked my psychiatrist to send detailed reports. She explained that I have been so psychologically affected that I still experience recurring nightmares. But that wasn't the most shocking part of the trial. The real surprise came when my secret witness took the stand, his wife, who had actually entered the witness protection program. She disappeared from the city without revealing her whereabouts, only to reappear in court and completely destroy his reputation. She informed the court that he isolated her from her family and friends, prevented her from working, and forced her to become pregnant repeatedly. So far, she has suffered 4 miscarriages. She stated that during her pregnancies, he became extremely violent, which caused the loss of the babies. She also mentioned that when he consumed alcohol, his behavior worsened considerably. And not only that, she was also the victim of terrible situations in her marriage on multiple occasions. He also carried out even more disturbing acts that I can't even mention here. Yes, as serious as what he did to me during my childhood. He was very good at hiding it, and most people believe that he had changed. But in reality, he was a monster. And the best part, my parents knew about it. They helped him cover it up, and they did exactly the same thing as when they protected him after what he did to me. That's why the prosecution brought separate charges against my parents. What finally motivated my sister-in-law to come forward after putting up with this for so long? That night, the night of my arrival, he not only assaulted her, but also her 3-year-old son. That same night, she stated that she could not get out of bed for days, and it was a miracle that she survived without receiving medical attention. And what was my brother's defense? He blames others. He claimed that he suffered from severe anger management issues, that he informed our parents about them, but that they never listened to him and that they ruined his life by forcing him to take care of me while they traveled. It is true that our parents were rarely there when we needed them. In fact, my brother behaved even worse in their absence. It was as if his cruelty intensified. I don't know if his version is true, but that doesn't justify forgiving him. The only thing that comforts me is that he has been found guilty. The sentences will be announced shortly, and I can't wait for it to happen so that I can finally leave this terrible city. I have come to hate visiting it because every return is linked to his trial. He has tried to prolong the process as much as possible, as if he wanted to make me suffer even more. The only positive aspect is that my grandmother is holding on, and all these trips and time I have spent in this hellish city have been less difficult thanks to her. Update 4. 2 more months have passed. First, my brother received a life sentence, a considerable time behind bars for everything he did, and he was still facing several additional cases. My parents knew about this, so they were charged with obstruction of justice and sentenced to between 6 months and a year. I only found out later, but they gave up the rights to their house to protect themselves financially. So my brother got the rights to the property while they were protected financially. And if anything happened to my brother, the house would pass to me. I was completely unaware of this arrangement and probably would never have found out, were it not for the fact that my brother died 2 weeks after being sentenced. Apparently, another inmate discovered that he enjoyed hurting women and children and decided to take justice into his own hands. He had 14 wounds on his body. He died instantly. My parents had the family contact me to inform me of this just as I was preparing for my wedding. I had decided to marry my fiancé as my nightmares had disappeared and my brother was in prison. I felt nothing about his death. He deserved that fate. If I had been in his place, he would not have shed a tear for me. I refused to postpone my wedding, claim his body, or give him a proper burial, being the only family member available to do so, as the rest of the family refused to offer him a funeral. He had become a complete family outcast, so the authorities took charge of burying him. I hope they placed him in an anonymous grave so that he will be forgotten and his son will never know his identity. My parents were furious with me for abandoning the family. They made me a request: transfer the deed to the house to another family member or find someone to maintain the family home, the very place where they made my life hell while deliberately ignoring what was happening. That's when I discovered that the property was now in my name. I was in complete control. And believe me, it felt extraordinary. I celebrated my wedding and then booked my honeymoon in a location close to their city. I assured them that I would take care of the arrangements for the house. And I kept my word. I sold absolutely all the belongings in the house and made about $100,000, even after significantly reducing the prices. I divided the money between my sister-in-law and the young man with hearing problems. The other victims refused the money and suggested donating it. Subsequently, I had the family home demolished and sold the land. That brought in another $100,000. I divided that amount into 3 parts, and I donated my portion to an organization that supports victims of abuse. I understand that some will think that selling the house intact would have generated more income for me, but for me it represented the scene of my nightmares, and I didn't want to know that it was still standing. I feel sorry for the buyers of the land, because I have a feeling that they will be building on a space marked by suffering. I admit that I am exaggerating with that comparison, but the trauma it has caused in my life is considerable. When my parents found out about the demolition, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. But obviously, they didn't have unlimited calls from prison, thanks to my actions. When they get out of jail in a few months, they'll have to start from scratch. Since then, I've blocked prison calls and returned to my country. Update 5. My parents tried to sue me for my actions, but the case was immediately dismissed. There is nothing they can do, and that gives me peace of mind. They also tried to contact their daughter-in-law to visit their grandson and try to find peace, as they put it, but she gave them peace in the form of a restraining order that prevents them from getting anywhere near her or their son. Since their release, they have requested financial assistance from various relatives, including my grandmother, but she has refused to give them any support. They own nothing because they spent all their resources on legal proceedings, both in their own case and in my brother's. They have written another long email, but this time I decided to delete it without reading it. It did not contain any information that might interest me, as I am in daily communication with my grandmother and hope to visit her soon. If their prison experience was miserable, their current situation is not going to improve substantially either. It is impossible for them to get back well-paid jobs, and at the moment they can only aspire to basic jobs. The only thing that would give me satisfaction would be if those jobs were forced. I have tried to persuade my grandmother to move to this country with us. I know she would like it, but she maintains family ties there, although my parents are excluded. Moreover, her state of health is very delicate, and flying is completely out of the question. I understand, but each visit reveals a progressive deterioration. I am grateful that she has survived for so long, although each return visit makes me fear that it will be our last encounter. At least I am grateful that she has lived long enough to see justice done for me and the other victims of my brother. I am even comforted to know that she is glad that her great-grandson is safe and away from harmful people like his father or my parents.